Hey there, guys. Welcome back to the Para Connection podcast. You're here with Schuler, Nate, Ryan, and Kaylee with PILT Paranormal. And today, we have a special guest with us, Sylvia Shults. We've had her on a couple of times, and she's going to be sharing some new experiences and locations with us that she's investigated, along with a possible sneak peek of a project she's working on. So I'm pretty excited about that. Nate, Kaylee, Ryan, you guys excited to get into this podcast?
Yeah. Super excited.
Let's do this.
I didn't talk to her last time, so...
Oh, yeah? Yeah, that's very true. Ryan didn't have that experience, so today we're going to change that. So let's go ahead and get this podcast rolling on and get Sylvia Shults on board with us. Here we go. All right, so we got Sylvia on the line with us. Sylvia, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Work's over for the day, and the evening stretches out with unlimited possibilities.
Awesome. Yeah, that's how we feel about it, too. You know, once you get off that time clock, I mean, it's a lot better. So, Sylvia, since we last spoke, I'm sure you've had a lot of adventures and endeavors going on, and we'd love to touch up a little bit on those with you. But to start off today's podcast, we were kind of hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on how you got into the paranormal and with your psychic and sensitive abilities, how you became comfortable with it and you knew what was really going on.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to share that with you. People always love an origin story.
Oh, yeah.
And the origin stories of ghost hunters are just as interesting as anything else.
Absolutely.
I have to disappoint your listeners right off. I did not grow up in a haunted house. I did not grow up seeing dead people. I still don't consider myself very psychic. I don't consider myself psychic at all. But I do realize that the more I'm doing this and the more I expose myself to these situations, the more sensitive I get. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So, how I got into the paranormal? Well, when I was... Oh, let's see. My sister had just been born. She was an infant, so I must have been 8 or 9 years old. And my parents took us on a road trip to where my mom had gone to college. And it was out in the country. It was in Carrollton, Missouri. So my dad is one of those dads that would just jump in the car and just like drive straight through the night and not stop at a hotel or anything. We were not big hotel people.
Oh, man.
So, so he just bundled the kids in the back seat, and my mom hopped in the passenger seat. My dad hopped in the driver's seat, and away we went, headed west. So, the kids just crashed out in the back seat. We were just completely insensible as soon as the car started. We were just out because it was so late when we left. So it was me and my sister and my infant sister and our cousin, Anthony. And we woke up, all the kids except for the infant, woke up in the back seat in the car. We had just been allowed to sleep in the car. Nobody woke us up to move us or anything. So it was the three of us, like, in a big puppy pile in the back seat. And I woke up first, and I looked out, blearily out of the back seat window, and I realized that my parents had put up a little tent next to the car, and that's where they were sleeping with my infant sister. And then it registered on me that we had spent the night camping out in a cemetery.
Oh, man.
I was 8 years old. I freaked out.
Man, I would too at that age. I mean, wow. What a twist.
Right? And, apparently we had arrived at the cemetery in the middle of the night, no less. It's scary enough waking up in a cemetery and realizing that's where you slept all night.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, an 8-year-old kid, and I was the oldest of the three kids in the back seat, so they all took their cues from me, so we all freaked out. But my dad said very sensibly, now this was before the laws, this was back in the 70s, and this was before the dawn to dusk laws. I don't know if it's a law, but the regulations that cemeteries are only open dawn to dusk. You could do that at that point. You could spend the night in the cemetery and nobody would say a word. And you wouldn't get rousted out or anything like that. So So that's what my dad did. He pitched a big tent in a cemetery.
Wow.
So that was my first experience with the paranormal, the hanging out in cemeteries, and I have to tell you, at 8 years old, I was not down with that.
Yeah, it's a lot different.
I love ghost stories. I just didn't want to be in the middle of one.
Man.
But the more I read obsessively as I was a kid, I read voraciously, and I loved anything weird, paranormal, supernatural, anything I could get my hands on. I read, Bermuda Triangle, Sasquatch, UFOs, missing time slips, chupacabras, anything like that. I just devoured it.
Yeah.
But I kept coming back to the ghost stories. I was terrified of ghosts when I was a kid, but I kept coming back to these ghost stories because the idea of communicating with someone who was freaking dead really appealed to me. Like, what have these people seen? I've always been a big history wonk. So the idea of talking to somebody who lived in a different time in history was just fascinating to me. So as I grew up, I kind of put away the UFOs, but I kept getting drawn back to the ghost stories because of the history. I was a history major in college, and that is what really draws me, is that historical connection, that living in a different time connection. That's what really grabs me about ghost stories, and that's why I've been so entranced with them for the rest of my life. I have a second stomach for ghost stories. I will devour them wherever I find them. And my best friend is somebody who can tell me a ghost story I haven't heard yet.
Man.
Yeah. So when I grew up, I realized that, I started off, I've always loved writing too. And I started off writing fiction, horror fiction, of course. And I got to realizing that, I don't have to make things up. I can write books of true ghost stories. I can find these stories and I can retell them in my own words. I can put my own interpretation and my own spin on them. And I am so grateful and so fortunate that people really enjoy that. They enjoy my storytelling, which I am just beyond grateful for. I love sharing these stories. I love looking at this history.
Absolutely. Yeah, along with the history on that, Sylvia, it's not only like retelling these stories of the deceased people, but it's going back in time with the culture, traditions, even, laws. I mean, just comparing from the 70s to now, there was a major difference. But if we're talking about people that lived in the 1800s, that's even more different than 40 years ago, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give you an example. Now, I'm working on a project right now that I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot because I want it to be a surprise, but one of the stories that I'm working on is the story of the Donnelly Massacre. And no one's ever heard of this. There have been a couple of books written on them, but you can't hardly find them in libraries. I work at a library. I can find practically anything. I ordered half a dozen books, all I could find on this particular incident in history. I have been able to get one of those books.
Wow. That's scarce.
Libraries just don't own it. And the book came in for me today. I'm just so excited to get a hold of it and read it. But the story of the Donnellys, now I trust that you'll cut me off if I go over time. When I'm writing about this, I start off with a disclaimer. I say, strap in. This is going to get really complicated and really weird. It's a really bumpy ride. The Reader's Digest condensed version of it, and this is what you said about different times and different mannerisms in different times really made me think about this. The Donnellys were an Irish immigrant couple who came to Ontario, Canada in the late 1840s. and they brought their Irish heritage with them. They were Catholics, and they attended a Catholic church. And the priest, the pastor of the Catholic church, got up one day, and the priest had put together something called the Peace Society. And there was a later out branch of that Peace Society called the Vigilance Committee. And what this Peace Society did ostensibly was to keep peace in the community around Ontario, but they did it by saying, oh, you have to let us into your house to look for stolen property. You have to sign this pledge that you're going to let us just come into your house whenever we want to and look for stolen property if you have it in your house. The Donnellys did not sign this pledge. They did not agree with it. And then this priest got up in the pulpit and started preaching hate against the Protestants in the area. Now, the Donnellys had a lot of Protestant friends. And James Donnelly got up in the middle of Mass and said, this is crap. You are preaching a very unchristian statement right now, and from now on, my family and I are going to go to the Catholic Church in London, not in Biddulph.
Oh,
so
wow.
we are going to switch churches. We're not going to have anything to do with you. And they felt very strongly about living and let live. I mean, they were very tolerant. The other interesting thing about the Donnellys is that, and this just blows my mind, the Ontario Land Company offered land for people to settle on. It was like a homesteading thing. You lived on the land for a while, you paid rent on it, and it was kind of like a rent-to-own thing. The Donnellys James knew that he could never afford land. So he basically squatted on 100 acres.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Get it done one way or the other.
And then it was, the 100 acres were owned by an absentee landlord who eventually ended up selling that property. And the guy who actually owned it showed up.
Oh, dang.
Oh, man.
Wanted his land. And James Donnelly was like, no! He's like, I have spent 10 years working this land, farming it, clearing it. I want this 100 acres. It's mine. I put in the work. No matter that I don't actually own it, I put in the work for it.
Man.
So they went to court. They went to court. And the court actually ruled that James Donnelly could have the northern 50 acres of this plot. Right.
Wow.
He didn't pay any money for it.
I'm glad he got something for it. I mean, a lot of times you'd just be like, tough luck, buddy.
Well, that's today's society
Yeah.
for you.
Right. So the second 50 acres, the southern 50 acres, was supposed to go to this other guy, not the absentee landlord, but somebody who rented that land from him. Patrick somebody. Patrick Mayer, I think. And, Patrick and James absolutely detested each other because James wanted the whole 100 acres and Patrick wanted the whole 100 acres because that's what he was renting.
Understandable.
So it eventually culminated in they both went to a logging bee. And the words were exchanged. Nobody knows how this fight started, but they both picked up big logging implements called hand spikes. They're like railroad spikes, but like 10 times as big. And blows were exchanged, and it ended up with Patrick lying on the ground with a hand spike through his left temple, and he died 2 days later.
Wow.
That made James a murderer. So he went on the lam. He disappeared. Nobody could find him. Constables kept showing up at his house, and his wife, Johanna, and his 3 eldest boys were like, we have no idea where he is. I don't know. I haven't seen him. I have no idea where he is. Well, during all this time, James was hiding in plain sight. Sharp-eyed observers may have noticed that there were 2 women working in the Donnelly fields. One was Johanna Donnelly. The other was James, dressed up in one of his wife's dresses.
Wow. I'm surprised he could fit in that dress.
Man.
But winters in Ontario are cold, so he turned himself in, and he was sentenced to die. He was sentenced to hang in September, and Johanna got up a petition, and everywhere she went, she had somebody sign it. So it was eventually commuted to 7 years in prison instead of hanging.
Oh,
So
wow.
she saved his life. Yeah. So, long story short, there's so much more detail in this story, but everybody hated the Donnellys. The Donnellys were blamed for, like, everything. The Donnellys set up a stagecoach. It started doing well. People got butthurt about the stagecoach doing well. And everybody just blamed the Donnellys for everything that went wrong. If a barn burned down, if a constable got attacked, if somebody got pushed around, everybody blamed the Donnellys.
Huh.
And that really went back to the Irishmen who settled in that area of Ontario brought that Protestant Catholic feud that had started 200 years before James Donnelly was even born. They brought that feud to Ontario. And the Donnellys just got caught up in the middle of it.
Wow.
Yeah, so
So
wrapping it up.
Sylvia,
Yeah.
what really kind of makes my brain tick here is like all those people, the locals in that area, they would blame that family for all the negative things going on, but yet there was a petition signing to save the life of the husband. It's just like, how are you going to want to save his life, but then point your finger?
Yeah, it was just amazing. And so on January 15th, 1880, there was a guy named Patrick Ryder. His nickname was Grouchy. There's no idea why, but Grouchy Ryder's barn burned down. And everybody blamed the Donnellys, even though the night the barn burned, the Donnelly boys, there were 5 boys in the family, and they were all out at a wedding. They had a completely airtight alibi, but everybody blamed the Donnellys. Even Grouchy Ryder admitted, he said, I've been neighbors with the Donnellys for 30 years. Never had a problem with them. But the reason I set constables after them was because everybody blames the Donnellys.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, oh, hey, prince of a guy, right? So, long story short, this Catholic priest got up in his pulpit again. And he said, the Peace Society is going to go after these wrongdoers, and I am going to put up $500 as a reward for bringing these never-do-wells to justice, even though they hadn't done anything.
Huh.
So members of the Vigilance Society met at a schoolhouse several miles away, got all liquored up, and went to the Donnelly farmhouse and killed James, Johanna. They killed Bridget Donnelly, who was Johanna's niece, who was visiting from Ireland, and they killed Tom Donnelly, one of the sons. They snuck into the house. They handcuffed Tom while he was asleep, and then woke him up.
Wow.
And James woke up, the father woke up and came into the kitchen, saw his son handcuffed. He's like, what have you got against us now? He just lost his temper. He's just, what now? What now? And Tom held up the handcuffs and held up his handcuffs wrists, and he goes, yeah, I'm handcuffed because this guy thinks he's smart. And the 30 guys busted into the house with farm implements. Tom made it as far as the front door, and somebody met him at the door with a pitchfork, stabbed him in the chest several times. He was still alive when he was dragged back into the kitchen, and somebody said, smack that guy in the head with a shovel a couple of times, stove his head in, and that's exactly what they did. They left the 4 adults for dead. There was a 13-year-old boy who was visiting, who was supposed to help with the farm chores. He hid under a bed, and these attackers poured coal oil over the bed and lit it on fire, not realizing that the kid was underneath it.
Wow.
And then the attackers all left to find the Donnellys that lived at another house. And the 13-year-old kid, Johnny O'Connor, came out from under the bed and ran to a neighbor's house barefoot, crying, and he was able to testify about all this. And the Donnellys who did survive the massacre also testified no one was ever brought to justice for this massacre.
Wow.
5 people dead. The house burned down, 5 people dead. There was another Donnelly brother that was shot at a different house. Died within 5 minutes of having his chest filled with buckshot. No one was ever tried for that crime. So yeah, you talk about different attitudes.
Wow. Yeah, that's a way different attitude right there, Sylvia. To the extreme. Wow.
Crazy different. So yeah, we've gotten way off track. But yeah, you wanted to hear about experiences I'd had as an investigator, and I will definitely share some with you. As I said, I believe very strongly that I am getting a little more sensitive. The more I do this, the more I go into places that I know are active.
How do you feel that you are sensitive in that way?
Well, it takes a lot of concentration, but I have the sense, and I could be completely making this up too, but I don't think I am. I can go.
You always feel like you're making it up.
I'm humble. I'm not all full of myself. I'm not going to say I can see dead people. If I can't, I can't, and I can't, so I don't say that. But I can walk into a place that I know has reported activity, and I can kind of feel the energy of the place. For a couple of examples. For the first example, I've been to the Pollock Hospital at the Peoria State Hospital. The Pollock Hospital was the tuberculosis ward. I've been there countless times, so I'm familiar with it. But still, there's a pervasive sense of, it's a bit of a gloomy place because for most of its history, between the years of 1950 when it opened and 1973 when the entire hospital closed, during that period of 23 years, there was an average of 3 to 5 deaths a day in that building. That land was also the site of 2 other structures for treating tuberculosis. So ever since 1902, when the asylum opened, people have been dying of tuberculosis on that plot of land for 71 years. So there's a lot of residue there. So it's not the most cheerful place. But I have been going into the Peoria State Hospital Museum, got to buy one of the cottages, one of the male cottages that's half a block from the Pollock Hospital. And I walked into that cottage for the first time, and the energy was completely different. This was a place, it was a great big, you go through a little hallway, the little entrance porch, and it opens up into this big, beautiful day room. This is where people had their wicker furniture sitting around. There were billiards tables. There was places where you could sit and read a book if you wanted to. This was a place for living rather than dying. And this was a place where guys came to hang out. They met their friends there. They sat and chatted with their friends there. The energy was so much lighter in the cottage than it was in the Pollock Hospital. I love the Pollock. I love it. But the energy in the cottage is so much different.
That's really interesting. Like, was it just like it felt playful, or it just felt lighter in general?
Lighter in general, yeah. I haven't been in there. I've been in there 3 times. So I haven't really gotten used to whether the energy is playful or just light, but it's definitely a different energy. You can feel that right away as you walk in. Another example is I had a very interesting experience when I went to the Villisca Axe Murder House.
Oh, really?
Now, yeah. So I walked in, and I was extremely fortunate. I was there with a group, but the group decided to go have dinner before the investigation. So I was allowed to take the key and go in and spend 45 minutes by myself in the Villisca Axe Murder House.
Wow.
As soon as I got there.
What was that like?
That was amazing. Oh my God, it was so cool. So I went in, I knew the story. I went through the bottom of the house. I went upstairs. It's a small house. It is so tiny. So I went into the house, and I was walking through, and I was narrating what was going on, narrating my feelings and experiences and everything. And everything was okay for a while, until I got into the attic where the murderer hid until the small hours of the night when he came out and slaughtered everyone in the house.
What did you feel when you went in there?
What's that?
What did you feel when you went in there?
Oh, well, I was in the attic and just looking around, getting my bearings. And the attic is very bare. There are a couple of chairs there for investigators to sit. There's a couple of toys on the floor for the, ghost children to play with. And I looked up because I really believe in investigations and looking everywhere you can and what do you smell besides what do you see and feel. So I looked up, and the ceiling of the attic isn't finished, and you can see, if you look up at the ceiling, you can see the roofing nails, the ends of the roofing nails, the points.
Oh, really?
Coming through the ceiling. And it's just like one every inch. There's just this mass of points, nail points, right there.
Oh,
and
man.
I'm 5'4", and I kind of had to watch my head in the attic. And I said aloud, I said, man, you'd really have to be careful if you were hiding in here in the dark. You couldn't stand up too fast. You'd really hurt yourself. And as soon as I said you could hurt yourself, I got this feeling of, all right, you're done here. You need to leave now.
Oh,
and
man.
I just noped it right out of there. I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave this attic right now and go to a different part of the house. And that's what I did. And that feeling went away, and I explored the rest of the house. And it was very interesting because the feeling I got from that house was not a feeling, in the evening, it was not a feeling of dread. It was a feeling of comfort and safety. This was a house where 4 children were being raised. This was a small house. This was packed with love and laughter and playing children. And that's the vibe I got from this house. So I stayed the night there. I slept on the parlor room floor, right next to the bedroom where the 2 neighbor girls were slaughtered. So nothing happened all night. Nobody touched me. I had a camera going. I didn't see anything weird on the camera. So I got up in the morning and got all my equipment together and left the house. And I was tasked with returning the key. I was the last person there. So I was tasked with going through and making sure everything was cool and then putting the key where it was supposed to be found by the owners. So I decided to do one more walk through the house. And if you'll remember the story, the people were slaughtered in the wee hours of the night. And it was their neighbor that noticed that everything was really, really quiet the next morning. And the neighbor came over and tried to knock and couldn't raise anybody, and got James Moore's brother to come over and let himself into the house, and it was the brother that found 8 people slaughtered, hacked to death with axes in their beds.
Wow.
So when I went in there in the morning, the energy was very different than than it had been the previous night. And I think that was because the murders were discovered in the early morning. And that psychic residue from that discovery was what I was picking up on that morning. The vibe in the house in the morning was way different than at night.
Gotcha. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine that kind of imprint at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do people actually live in that house now?
What's that?
Do people actually live in the house now?
Oh, no. There were people living in the house, and the people that own it now do not live there. So off of the kitchen, there's a little pantry, and when people actually lived there, that pantry had been converted into indoor plumbing. That was the bathroom that was right off the kitchen. And since the people moved, the residents moved out, and people bought it and have it just for paranormal research, they tore out that bathroom and restored it to the way a pantry would have looked in 1912 when these murders happened.
Oh,
So
okay.
they've done a little bit of renovation. There's no electricity in the building except for an air conditioner in the lower bedroom. And that made it really hard to sleep because the air conditioner kept kicking on and waking me up.
I'm sure that was
That was the
annoying.
only problem I had sleeping in this house, was because the air conditioner kept kicking on and waking me up. Other than that, I didn't have any problem sleeping in the house. It was amazing.
Nice. Did you have any activity? Did you record any activity while you were there? Like any any EVPs or other stuff?
I did not get any EVPs at the Villisca house. If you listen to my podcast, Lights Out, I have put up the Villisca episode. So just go to sylviashults.wordpress.com and click on the Lights Out tab, and the Villisca episode is pretty close to the top. I think it's episode 80.
Okay.
Anyway, so you can listen to that. Another experience that I had, and this is kind of similar, about 3 weeks after I went to Villisca, I went to the Sally House in Atchison, Kansas. Now, the Sally House is, they call it the Sally House because the entity that hangs out there is supposed to be, it manifests as a 7 to 8 year old girl, and the homeowners that encountered it first nicknamed it Sally. But whatever is in that house is not an innocent little girl. That has been established by the homeowners. That has been established by many, many researchers that have gone in there. So I knew going in that I was not going to pander to this entity. I was not going to refer to it as Sally. I knew better. I knew it wasn't a little girl. I knew it was something a lot worse than that.
What sorts of things
So
what sorts of things did previous people encounter before you went there?
Oh, man. So the homeowners that lived there, Deborah Pickman, and I think her husband's name was Tony. Deborah actually wrote a book about it called The Sally House Haunting. Things started off very innocuous. There were teddy bears that would arrange themselves in a circle. And when Ghost Adventures went there, they saw a teddy bear moving on its own. This entity really likes teddy bears. That was okay. They got used to teddy bears moving on their own, and then the activities started ramping up. The entity would light a candle on the back of somebody walked into the bathroom that's right off the kitchen on the first floor, and there was a candle, like a scented candle, on the tank on the toilet. And everyone was like, did you light this candle? Why is this candle burning unattended? Because they had an infant son in their house. And the mother was like, all right, who lit this candle and didn't tell me about it? And nobody fessed up to it. And everyone was in sight of everyone else. Nobody lit the candle. And the entity lit it.
Wow.
And after that, it ramped up even further, and the entity set one of the teddy bears on fire.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. This
does
thing
it
was
even
not
do
kidding
that?
around.
Pyromancy.
It was, yeah, it was just weird. And this thing was not innocent. It turned out to be very malevolent. It scratched Tony several times, and the Pigments finally just moved out. They were like, we cannot handle this. We have an infant son. We're not dealing with this anymore. I don't know if anyone actually lived in the house after the Pickmans moved out. They lived there in the early 1990s. And I don't think anyone actually lives there now. It's furnished and there's electricity, but I think they just keep it for investigation.
Gotcha.
Now, when I first started thinking about going there, I thought I could dress up in the lore of the house is that in the early part of the 20th century there was a doctor that lived in the house, and a little girl was brought to him. Her mother brought the little girl to him suffering from appendicitis, and the doctor knew that he had to operate right away and there was not enough time for the anesthetic to take effect. And he did this operation on the kitchen table, just really hurriedly, and the little girl died during the operation. That's the Sally lore. I don't believe it. There's no historical record of it, which is why I don't believe it. If I can't prove it through history, I call shenanigans on it. I'm going to say that's just folklore. That's just something made up to explain this. If there's no historical record of it, I'm going to discount it. So I thought to myself, well, I'll bring a doctor's jacket, a doctor's lab coat, and I'll see if I can get any reaction that way. And then I learned more about it, and I learned that the Sally story was probably not true. So I'm like, I'm not even going to bother with the jacket, with the lab coat. I'm not going to take any crap from this entity. I'm gonna call it out. I'm not gonna provoke, because I don't do that. But I'm going to let it know that I'm not gonna take any guff from it. So I was very no nonsense the whole time. When I decided before I went in, I was not gonna take any crap. I was just gonna be completely no nonsense the whole time. I stepped into that house, and the energy was, the best way I can describe it is it was sullen. It was pouting. The energy in the house was pouting.
Really?
Really. It was very strange. I've never felt anything like that. And I did get a couple of EVPs from the Sally house.
What kind of things did you get?
The energy reacted very, very well to dowsing rods. So I started off with the dowsing rods in the kitchen, and I got out my rods, and there were some investigators there that this was their first investigation. I'm like, holy crap, your first investigation ever, and it's at the Sally house. Oh my God, what are you thinking? So I explained the dowsing rods to these investigators, and this is also a Lights Out episode, and you can hear this EVP if you listen to the episode. And I'm in the kitchen, and I'm explaining the dowsing rods. And I did that for people who are listening to Lights Out, who may not know what that entails. So, and I always explain it to the entities that I'm working with, too. Here's what I expect from you. And I was even more no-nonsense with this entity than I usually am. I'm usually kinder than that. But I said, all right, you are going to put these rods apart for no, and you're going to cross them for yes. This is how we're going to do it. Do you understand me? Have you got that? And I heard a growled no, And then I heard a whispered no right before the dowsing rods went way apart. I mean, as far apart as they were touching my shoulders. So that's a no answer. And I heard an EVP no right before the dowsing rods swung apart in no.
Wow, Sylvia.
So,
It was amazing.
so we know that they call it Sally, but do they actually know or who or what the force is?
They think it's a demon.
Do they know like what kind of demon? Like the name of the demon?
No. No, they do not know its name. They don't even know exactly what type it is. It's just probably demonic.
And they're thinking there's just one like force there. There's like no other
There aren't
ghost
multiple.
or like multiple.
No. From all the research I've done, it's just the one entity. But it's a nasty one. I mean, I'm not Zach Bagans. I'm not going to go around calling everything I encounter a demonic entity. I think they're very, very rare. I think they're very few and far between. But they are out there. And I do believe that there is something in the Sally house that is deeply unpleasant. Now, there's another story that I tell in Lights Out. There's a story connected to the Sally house. I started off my weekend, I crammed everything I could possibly do into this weekend. The Sally house is a 6-hour drive for me, so I'm like, man, I'm going to make a couple side trips. I'm going to do everything I can.
Yeah.
Cram everything I can into this weekend. So, on my way down, I had to go through Springfield. That was the best course for me to take, was going through Springfield, Illinois, and then heading west to Atchison, Kansas. And there's a wonderful group in Springfield that meets once a month called Prairie Land Paranormal Consortium. And they're good friends of mine, and this happened to be a weekend that they were meeting. I said, great, I'm going to hang out at your meeting for a little while. And the person in charge, Carl Jones, asked me to, he's like, hey, do you have any talks you can give? I was like, yeah, sure, let's give a talk. I mean, you guys were at one of my talks, so whenever anyone asks me to give a talk on the Peoria State Hospital, I'm happy to do that. So
Yeah.
Carl's like, yeah, why don't you tell us what's going on with that? So I did. And I said, may I go first? Because I'm in the middle of a road trip and I have to get on the road. I'm heading to the Sally house tonight. And Carl, his eyes got wide and he said, you need to talk to Larry because he has had a lot of experience there and he knows a lot of people who have been there. And he said, be careful. So I got to talk to Larry, and Larry's like, yeah, you need protection when you go there. Be very, very careful. He said, I know people who live a block away and have paranormal activity in their house. And he said, I have known several people who have been to the Sally house and then have gotten into bad car wrecks afterwards. So he said, I said, I have my protection tea, I have my crystals, I have my white light visualization. I'm ready. I promise I will be careful, but I think I'm ready. So he said, just please be careful. I promised him I would. So I get there. And when I go to an investigation, especially a place I know that's going to have negative energy, I make myself a tea. I brew a tea with water that sat out under a lunar eclipse, and I put in very strong herbs like sage and comfrey and nettle and cinnamon, and big dollop of honey in there because honey is a very strong sweetener and it's antibacterial and it's really good stuff. So I make myself this tea, and when I drink it, I do this visualization of the full moon and that beautiful pure white light. And I imagine that water that's been soaking under the full moon, I imagine that going into my body and suffusing every cell in my body with these strong herbs and that white light of the full moon. And that is my protection ritual before I go into a place like this. So I get to the Sally house, I take my mason jar out of my ghost hunting bag, and you guys have all had tea before, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Nothing like that, though.
This tea had gelled.
Oh.
What?
It was the consistency of thick syrup.
A lot of honey.
How much
I've
honey
never
was
had
in
that
there?
happen before. It was crazy. I choked about a third of it down, and it tasted fine, but I could not get past the texture of it.
Now, did you make it did you let it sit for longer? Like, do you normally
I sure
drink it right
did.
away?
I made it right before I left. On this road trip. So it had cooled, of course, but it hadn't sat in the jar for more than 12 hours. It was less than 12 hours that it had been in there. Probably about a 6-hour drive. It had probably been in the jar for about 7 hours.
Is that normally, how long you leave it for?
Yeah.
At other investigations, and it's never done that before?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, without some type of natural, process of it turning into a gelatin. I mean, obviously that stands
there were
out, Sylvia.
Yeah, there were no herbs in there that would have caused it to gel. There was no aloe vera. There was no chia seeds. There was nothing in there that could have caused that gelling effect.
And this happened before
So
you
I
got to the
didn't-
location, right?
No, I was at the location,
Okay.
and we were about to start the investigation. I said, "Oh, hey, I need to drink my tea," and I got it out, and I was just like, "Oh, no."
Yeah.
Man.
So I didn't drink it all. I only drank about a third of it. So I did not have that internal protection. And the next day was a Sunday, and I went to a couple more interesting haunted places. I went to the Gore Psychiatric Museum. I went to, where else? So the Patty Museum. These are upcoming Lights Out episodes that I'll be posting pretty soon. Went to Mount Morris Cemetery in St. Joseph, Missouri, and it was just a beautiful, wonderful, sunny summer, late spring Sunday, and it was just relaxing and wonderful. I got to see a lot of fun stuff, and I ended up staying so late at this Gore Psychiatric Museum that it was dusk by the time I headed home, and my GPS did not take me on a big highway, like an interstate highway. Instead, it took me home via back roads, which is how at about 10:30 that night, I hit a deer.
Oh,
What?
wow.
Did about $4,000 worth of damage to my car.
Wow, Sylvia.
Yeah.
Jeez. That really makes you think that the lore behind the whole negative energy, and causing wrecks, I mean, come on. That's evident
Uh-huh.
at that point.
Yeah.
Wow.
It could have been a coincidence, but I don't think so. I have done a lot of traveling on a lot of back roads,
Yeah.
and yeah.
I mean, what are the chances that it would happen, that night? Maybe not, maybe the next day or a week or a month, but
It wasn't even deer season. It wasn't even fall. It wasn't even the rut. This was late May.
yeah. Yeah, and from personal
And
experiences.
the deer just kind of ran out and just jumped at my car. And I texted Carl when I got home. I said, "Tell your friend Larry that the Sally House claimed another victim." I said, "I'm fine, but my car's borked."
Man. And that's what's important, is that you were safe out of that whole thing. But I mean,
Yeah.
still, $4,000 of damage, that doesn't feel good either.
Right. Sucked.
So, Sylvia,
So I'm never going to the Sally House again. I would love to go back to Villisca. I am never going to the Sally House again.
with the Sally House, I personally have one more question. I'll let the other guys kind of chime in real quick, but I'm curious if you have an answer or if you've heard anything or read. Is there an origin to the demonic entity that's allegedly there, of where it came from?
That's a really tough question to answer. One of the people who rented it after the Pickmans was into the occult. There is a spray painted, well, it's mostly been sandblasted away, but there was a pentagram spray painted in black on the basement floor. Yeah, and across from that, underneath the body of the house, underneath the kitchen, there is kind of a bricked up area, like a crawl space, but part of the bricks have fallen away, and you can look in there, and it looks creepy AF. It really does. It looks like a portal to hell. And there have been investigators. I watched one of the YouTube videos on this, and a couple of investigators, and I have no idea what possessed them to do this, pun intended, but they brought a Ouija board down there. And one of the guys that was sitting there playing with his hands, with his fingers on the planchette, was also doing the Estes method, where you put ping pong balls and tape them over your eyes, and you put headphones on so the sound is blocked out. He even had a breathing mask on to block out any smells. He had no sensory input whatsoever except for the fingertips on the planchette. This was, I think, an incredibly foolish thing to do.
Yeah.
There were 3 other investigators down there, 2 guys on the camera and the other guy on the other side of the planchette. So he had other people down there with him, but that got real freaky real fast. The guy was reacting. He never said anything, but he was reacting like he was being touched. He was reacting like he was seeing things and flinching away from them. It was just really bizarre. So, with the pentagram on the floor and there was evidence of animal sacrifice down there too, and that's why that renter got kicked out.
Wow.
But yeah, with all of that I think was a reaction to something already being in there. And I think the renter was trying to summon that entity further into the house.
Okay.
I don't know the origin of that demonic entity. It seems to have been there when the Pickmans moved in. I don't think it has anything to do with the doctor that lived there. I don't think it has anything to do with the little girl who may or may not have died on the table.
Gotcha.
I do believe in demons. I do believe in demonic presences. The lore of this house is that the little girl died during the appendectomy, and they make a big deal of her last conscious moments were of a man hurting her terribly, and then she died. So maybe something like that actually happened. There is no historical record.
Yeah.
But maybe so many people have told this story that it has created some sort of thought form, like a tulpa.
Yep.
Maybe that lore has just taken on a life of its own. And whatever malevolent entity happened to be in the area kind of glommed onto this lore.
And made it
Anything's possible.
And made it like a reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've also believed with other stories too, Sylvia, such as like Slenderman. You know, Slenderman itself may not be a real entity, you know, but who's to say that there's not a demonic entity that is real, and it can take the form on of exactly.
Piggybacking on it. Yeah.
Okay. I know that I've seen like a documentary about that house, and there was supposedly a picture of an older gentleman that they had taken, or someone had taken, where he was sitting, and like two of the children were in front of him, and they had suspected that he was the one that like went into the house to kill them.
Okay. As much as I love history,
Yeah.
I have a lot of things that I research. I am not very well versed in. My thing is history more than true crime. I'm interested in the actual things that happened.
Yeah.
I am not very good at puzzling out the threads of the stories of true crime.
Yeah.
I do know that there were a lot of suspects for these murders.
Oh, okay.
I do know that no one was ever found that they could actually pin these murders on. It is theorized that the murderer was actually someone who hopped a train. There is a train tracks that runs very close to the house. Freight trains go by there all the time, and it's possible there were other axe murders at that time in the early 1900s, around 1912. One of them happened in Monmouth, where I went to college, and it's theorized that it was the same guy just riding the rails and hopping off every once in a while to commit an axe murder. So if that's the case, then who knows who it was. But I do know that these people, these townspeople, one of them was a minister, I think. Well, all of these people in the town that were accused, none of them, it was never able to be proven that any of them did it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's not a very satisfactory answer, but
No,
I do history. I don't do true crime.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah.
Did you say that everybody was asleep when they got killed?
Yes, that's the thing. That is, I think, why there was such a feeling of peace in the house all evening. This was, as I said, this is a place of love. This is a place where a couple was raising their young children, and that was the last thing all these people knew. There were two little neighbor girls, friends of Mary's, of the daughter. There were 3 sons and a daughter. They were friends. They got tucked into bed. They were cared for just as much as the children of the family were. And these parents tucked their guests into bed. They tucked their children into bed, and then they went to bed themselves, and everyone fell asleep, knowing that they were cared for and loved. And they never woke up. The only victim that may have been conscious, the killer came out of the attic and attacked the parents first, then went into the children's bedroom and slaughtered all the children. And these were all axe blows to the face. Then he went back through the parents' room, down the stairs, and went into the kitchen and made himself a sandwich. And as he was doing that, he heard a small noise from the bedroom off of the parlor, which is where the 2 neighbor girls were, Ina and Lena Stillinger. And they found the younger girl, and I think that was Lena? I don't remember. They found the younger girl kind of halfway off of the bed with a defensive wound on her hand. And they think that she woke up, made the noise, got the killer's attention, and he realized, oh crap, there are 2 other people. There are other people in the house that are still alive. I need to go kill them too. So Lena was the only one who may have been even vaguely conscious of what was going on. Everyone else just woke up dead. So they didn't even know anything was happening. So there was no feeling of terror. There was a feeling the next morning that I picked up on of deep despair in the house. But that was a result of the neighbor knocking on the door and finding no one answering, and the brother coming over and coming in and finding everyone. So that was not necessarily terror and being attacked. this was despair. Oh crap, this has already happened.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I have a question, but it's like your opinion on something. So,
Sure.
like,
That's all this is. It's just my opinion.
so, well, because this summer we might do an investigation where we know where 2 girls were actually killed or murdered.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna go and see, if we can reach out to them. But I guess, do you think that if like either like a medium or a sensitive is able to, socialize with a spirit and say, hey, like, can you give me details about, who did this to you? Do you think that it's possible for, spirits actually give somebody details about who, killed me, or give me more details to actually maybe help solve a case, or, you know what I mean?
It has happened before. There has been court testimony from a deceased person that has been accepted and admitted into court testimony. It's not very usual. I can only think of 2 cases where that has happened, but it has happened. It has happened where a murder victim has made contact with the living and said, this is who killed me, go get them.
Okay.
Go make sure the police know about this person. So I think it would depend on the strength of the spirits. I think it would depend on how long they had been dead. With these 2 court cases, the murder victim had only been dead for several months, even weeks, when they made contact with a relative or a friend even. And they were still very powerful at that point. They were still getting used to their afterlife powers, I guess. But they were still conscious enough and hadn't drifted away into whatever it is that's waiting for us after we die. They were still compost mentis enough to make contact and say, this is who did it. Please have the police investigate them.
Oh, okay.
So I guess it would depend on how much time had passed.
So you think like the sooner, the better, you're thinking?
Oh, definitely. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Now, Sylvia, with those 2 cases, were there actual physical, real-world evidence that came into play to justify those spirit allegations?
Yes. Yeah. One of them happened in the 1880s, I think, and it was a daughter who had been in an abusive relationship with her husband, and her husband killed her. And that's right, it's coming back to me now. I don't remember names of this. I'm sorry, I can't give you the names, but she died, and everybody knew she had died. And there was a wake. It was the 1880s, so the body was laid out in the parlor and all that sort of stuff. And the husband was just fussing over the body, and oh, my wife is dead. Oh no! And he had wrapped a scarf around her neck, and her mother said something about, oh, let me take this scarf off, and the husband was like, no, don't do that, just leave the scarf on there, which was kind of weird. And the daughter appeared to her mother several days after she was buried, after the daughter was buried, and said, my husband strangled me. And the novelist Sharon McCrum actually wrote a book using this ghost story as the premise for her book. And she was like, yeah, my husband strangled me. I want you to dig me up and prove it. And they did. They exhumed the body, and they unwrapped that scarf. It's kind of like a silk scarf, not a woolen scarf or anything like that, but like a silk scarf. And they took the scarf off from around her neck, and there were bruises, and the neck was just really loose. Her neck had been broken.
Wow.
And her husband was trying to hide it in the coffin when she was being waked, and she was on display by putting the scarf around her neck. And the other case happened in some big city. I don't remember whether it was Chicago or Detroit. I don't think it was Chicago. some big enough city to have an immigrant population. And there was a Latina girl who had fallen in with kind of the wrong crowd. And she worked at an office building, and she had a couple of friends, work friends, And she had this guy that she was going out with who ended up killing her. And nobody could figure out who did it. They had very little to go on. There were very few clues to go on at the crime scene. And this Latina woman, her ghost appeared to one of her work friends, another girl. I think she was white. I don't think she was Latina. But the Latina appeared to her and said, it was my boyfriend so-and-so who killed me. And there had been, the only clue that was at the house, was at the crime scene, was that some of this girl's jewelry was missing. And this guy was two-timing her, just using her as a bit of fluff on the side, and he stole her jewelry and gave it to his real true girlfriend.
Wow.
And that's what the ghost said. She said, go and find my jewelry. He gave it to his girlfriend. So that's how that case was solved.
Wow. That one,
Yeah.
that's insane, to say the least. For the second one, that really stands out, to actually go look for people that are living, looking for specific jewelry that the average person wouldn't know about, being a part of the deceased, and then it is.
That was much, much later. That was in the 60s or 70s.
Okay, 60s, 70s,
Yeah.
wow.
Maybe early 80s, but I think it was in the 70s.
Wow. Yeah, that's something else,
Yeah.
Sylvia. I mean, and to go back on what Ryan's saying, some of these investigations that we're planning on doing for the 2020 year, these locations do have real life documented, deaths on site.
Mm-hmm.
And most locations that we've gone to, obviously there's allegations or, old rumors and urban legends and whatnot, but these are actually documented, and it's a new take that we're gonna kind of go on with proof.
Good.
Yeah, proof from this world, and see if that kind of correlates
Yeah.
with the next world, if you will.
And that is so much better for an investigation, because if you know the history, then you can tailor your questions, and you're going to get a much higher chance of getting a good EVP. You're going to have a much higher chance of actual communication.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Sylvia, I did have one more question before we come sadly to an end on today's podcast.
Okay.
It kind of goes back to your origins of when you were a little girl and when you were first introduced to the paranormal. Can you recall the very first incident or encounter that you had with the paranormal that stood out to you, or that really made you think differently about life?
Yes. And it happened, well, okay, there are a couple that I'll tell you about. One was much earlier, and the other happened when I was an adult. This was just several years ago.
Okay.
When I was in college, I went on an exchange student program, and I got to spend 2 months in England and 2 months in Italy. And I was not a ghost hunter at that point in time, and I wish I had been, because I could have gone on a ghost tour in London and New York and all these places. Oh my God!
That would have been great.
But I was not a ghost hunter at that point in time. But I did absolutely fall in love with Warwick Castle in Warwick, England. And there is, in the town of Warwick, which kind of lies below the castle, there's a church called St. Mary's, and they have crypts in the basement. And people are buried, you walk along the floor, and their tombstones set into the floor, and you're walking on dead people. But also there are crypts in the walls, kind of like mausoleums. And there's a little barred window, and you look through just like in an American mausoleum. So I was looking through the barred window into one of these crypts, and there were 3 or 4 biers on each side, on the right and left sides. And I have no idea what this was. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, and I claim no sensitivity at all, remember, but all of a sudden, I got this feeling from the second beer from the bottom of the floor on the left, and it was like somebody was glaring at me saying, "You don't belong here. You are alive. We are dead. This is not your place. Get out." I'm like, okay, I'm leaving.
Yeah. Man.
I don't consider that a psychic event. I like to think that I was sensitive enough to pick up on something. I still don't know what it was, but it was enough to get me out of that basement.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what.
Wow.
And then the second thing that happened, this was only about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. I was doing research for my very first book of true ghost stories. And I went to a haunted theater in Peoria. And this theater is haunted by the ghost of one of the directors that used to work there, a man named Norman N. Dean. He died in 1960 when he was in his early 30s. I believe it was cancer. But he loved the theater very, very much. And he has stayed there, and he is a beloved member of the theater family. Everyone knows Norman. Everyone loves Norman. So I was doing research, found out about Norman, and decided to go have a visit. And got there in the afternoon. I had a split shift from work, so I had to leave at some point and go back to work. So I went there, and I'm poking around the theater, and the manager of the theater was kind enough she was in the front office, and she let me just hang out on stage by myself. And there was a set being built. They were in between productions. And there was a board, like a light pine board, lying across a couple of chairs. And I addressed the open air, and I was still a baby ghost hunter at this point in time. So I didn't have any equipment. I didn't know what I was doing. But I addressed the open air. I said, "Norman, my name is Sylvia, and I'm writing a book about ghost stories, and I have heard that you are a ghost in this theater. I know you loved it very much. And I said, I would love to be able to tell my readers that you're actually here. Can you make a noise for me or something?" I said, "I have no equipment, so I can't take your picture. But if you'd make a noise, that would be wonderful. Or move something, that would be great." And I listened, and I didn't hear anything, and I looked around, I couldn't see anything moving. I looked over by the stage door, and there was a child's desk sitting by the stage door, and there was a stack of plastic shot glasses sitting on the desk. So I said, "Aha! Shot glasses are nice and light. It's easy for a non-corporeal spirit to move." So I plucked the top shot glass off of this pile of shot glasses, and I put it right in the middle of this nice light pine board. And I said, "There you go, Norman. Here's something nice and light. If you could do that for me, if you could move that for me, that would be wonderful. I'd appreciate it." And I looked at the shot glass. The shot glass was So about that time, there was a theater employee, a volunteer. She was working on the set, so she came up and introduced herself, and we started talking, and she gave me a tour of the backstage area. I'm like, "This is so cool. I haven't been backstage in the theater since I was in high school. I mean, this is great." College. But she took me on a tour, and she was telling me ghost stories about encounters she'd had with Norman, and I was just eating it up. This is wonderful. So we got all the way around the backstage area, and we got back to the main stage area. And I said, "Pam, thank you so much for the tour. I appreciate it, but I have to leave and go back to work now." And I said, "Norman, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed hearing stories about you. but I have to go to work now, so this is your last chance. If you want to let me know that you're here, please do something to let me know. And Pam said, did you hear that? And I said, no. No, I didn't. What happened? So apparently Norman likes to hang up on the catwalk above the stage. And Pam pointed up to the catwalk and she said, I heard a shuffling up on the catwalk. And I said, Norman, that was wonderful, but I'm sorry, I missed that. Could you do it again, please? And Pam just whipped around with her finger pointing up, and sure enough, we both heard rustling on the catwalk. And there was no one up there. So I said, oh, Norman, thank you so much. I heard that. I know you're up there. Thank you so much for letting me know that you're there. I really appreciate it. That was wonderful. So I picked up the shot glass, the plastic shot glass, and I was raised properly. I was raised to put things back where I found them. So I went over to the desk with the pile of shot glasses on it, and the stack of shot glasses was gone.
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 No one else had moved
And
it.
Wow.
No one else was back there. It was just me and Pam. And I looked at Pam and I said, there was, okay, all right, there was a stack of shot glasses here. And I could see this smile spreading across her face as I talked. I said, that stack is where this shot glass came from. I took it off the top of the stack, and now the stack is gone. And you didn't move that, did you? And she said, no. And I knew that was going to be your answer because she had been with me the whole time. And she said, that's what Norman likes to do. He likes to move stuff. He likes to play tricks. And then she said, to be fair, you did ask him to move the shot glass.
Shot glasses.
Yes. He just moved the whole pile. And I talked to Pam a few weeks later, and she said that stack of shot glasses never has turned up.
Oh my gosh, sounds like a show-off.
Wow.
So that was my first experience actually communicating with a spirit, and that was great. That's something I'll never forget.
That's awesome, Sylvia. Yeah, you kind of answered a question I had. I was going to ask, did you think that the shot glasses was that shuffling up on the catwalk? But being that they haven't shown up yet, and I'm sure people's walked up there, it probably wasn't.
No, it sounded like it sounded like footsteps.
Okay, that type of shuffling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Wow,
It
that's
sounded
interesting.
like somebody leaning with their elbows over the catwalk and kind of shuffling around and moving their elbows around and maybe shuffling their feet a little bit. If someone was watching a play from the catwalk and fidgeting a little bit, that's what it sounded like.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I know that would throw me off guard for a minute, especially if it's just two people in a big theater area. I mean, come on now.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh, we were both delighted.
Man.
We walked out of there with these huge grins on our faces. I wasn't scared at all. I was loving it.
That does sound like a really unique and neat, like, awesome experience.
For sure.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any more questions for Sylvia?
I don't
chance?
have any. I'm
No,
good.
I don't.
Not right off? Well, Sylvia, I hate to say it, but I think our podcast is coming to an end right about now.
Okay.
Yeah, we've hit a good time for the podcast here. Before we go off, though, just like always, if people want to reach out to you, check out your books, or look into the podcast, what would be the best ways for them to reach out to you?
The best place to find me is at sylviashults.wordpress.com, and that's SHULTS. If you go to that site, at the top of the page there are listings, the places you can click for horror fiction, romance fiction, and paranormal nonfiction. That's what you're probably going to be looking for. And there's also a tab up there that says Lights Out. And if you click on that, it's going to have a list of every single episode with the YouTube link. Lights Out is also a podcast, but I do put pictures behind it and put it up on YouTube just so it's easy to find. But if you're into the podcast instead, it's on Spotify and SoundCloud and iTunes and Apple and anywhere you can find a good podcast. Just look for Lights Out with Sylvia Shults and you'll find it.
Wonderful. So it's not hard to find you at all then.
No. People surprise me every day. They say, "Hey, I listen to your podcast." Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Again, Sylvia, we can't thank you enough for coming back on and sharing more stories with us and even giving us a little look inside of future projects you have coming out. Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always fun listening to what you have to say because you have like lots of fun stories.
Thank you. I love telling stories, and I love telling stories about ghosts.
So do we.
Oh, yeah. Well, Sylvia, you have a wonderful day and evening, and we will most definitely talk with you in the future.
Fantastic. Good night, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Another awesome podcast with Sylvia Shults. I think that went fantastic. What do you think, Nate?
Oh yeah, very informative. She's a really nice person.
Well, I mean, every time that she comes on, she always has a good story to tell and good experiences. And luckily, Ryan was with us this time. What do you think, Ryan?
No, I thought it was good.
Pretty good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few new stories that we didn't get to share and listen to with her last time, especially at the talk, because obviously there's not enough time for all the stories that she has or the experiences. But the one that stood out to me the most was with the demonic entity at the Sally house, because for the mere fact that it's portraying as a child and the origin of the entity isn't known. I mean, there's just a lot of questions, but with it being so active, to me that just intrigues me, and it's one of those like go-to stories. So that one stood out to me a lot. What about you, Kaylee? Do you have any thoughts?
I was fascinated by how she could sense how different an atmosphere would be when she goes in, even during the different times of the day. Like when she mentioned the axe murder cabin house. Was it a cabin? I can't remember.
It's a little bit of both. It can be what you want.
Axe murder
Yeah,
house.
so it was kind of neat how she said it seemed really peaceful at night because technically the family was murdered while they were sleeping, and then in the morning it seemed kind of full of despair.
I will say that's a different take. I've not heard that theory before, or even someone saying that they experienced those type of emotions. Considering that there were murders, but there's still some type of positive vibe, which to a point I think is good, but still it's makes you wonder. It really does what the other side has in store. Well, with that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's podcast, depending on when and where you're listening. Of course, if you guys want to reach out to us with questions, concerns, comments, or you want to get on the podcast or share a topic, you know how to reach us. Go to Google, type in PILT Paranormal, and you're going to find our Facebook, Instagram, website, and of course the podcast. And we're on just about any and every podcast platform you can think of, so it's not too hard to find us. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Of course, thank you guys again for tuning in, and until next time, stay frosty.